Thank you. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Professor. We're not supposed to compliment each other, but it was a great speech. The last great Hungarian leader was King Matthias. Yeah, you reacted immediately, of course. And recent research shows he was murdered by his Italian wife, Beatrix. Yeah, that it happens. I know it happens. And you know why? Recent research shows she murdered him because he spoke even more than she did. So I just want to say I have a dilemma here because I have been working on my speech for a while. You know that. So usually I make notes and I know exactly what to say. But I wrote this speech and I was going to read it, but you know what? You will find that really boring. So what I will do is I will refrain from reading the speech. I might rework it and then give it to Mark so it becomes part of the the archives. No, that sounds too sophisticated. We have some great Hungarians around, like Zsa Gabor. Now, the problem is no one's heard of Zsa Gabor until she got into a fight with a policeman. Zsa Gabor was a real big star in the United States, very well known the world over. Most importantly, she was known because she had, I think, the present husband is her ninth husband, a Hungarian woman. Huh? I don't know, but the fifth husband said at their on their wedding dinner, I know what is expected of me, but I don't know how to make it interesting. That's really what where I want to start. I know what is expected of me, but I don't know how to make it interesting. I will try. Are there any Norwegians here? Good dog. Any Danes? One Dane? Okay. Any Swedes? Okay, Scandinavia. The Nordic countries are well represented. I just want to say I wonder why the Nobel Peace Committee never awarded rock and roll the Nobel Peace Prize, because it would have deserved it. And I say this because all the things that I'm saying is about why rock and roll. If you ask me, many years ago, I had a choice to become a rock and roll musician or a diplomat, and actually I wanted to become a rock and roll musician instead. This idea that I would become an ambassador and work at NATO and work represent my country in the United States was not in the cards. I was going to be in rock and roll music, so I just wanted to make sure that I established my credentials as a musician, because it's nothing I did because I figured out this would be something funny. It's something that is inside me, and that's really what I want to describe to you, and I want to ask Mark if Mark is around. What's the schedule? Because I want to know exactly what we're doing. You have a time? So it's until 11:30. Professor, this will be difficult. I have 20 minutes to say what I was going to say in 60, and then leave room for questions and answers. So anyway, let me just jump in into the middle of this. First, before I move on to the diplomatic side and rock and roll and the history, why this is so important, I just want to tell you one element that might have eluded your attention. The defining economy of the 21st century, whether we like it or not, will be creativity. Creativity is going to be the new industrial revolution. So what building factories was to the 18th and the 19th century, creativity will be our real asset. And the competition will be between the countries that realize that there is no creativity without culture, without the arts, without letting the arts flow into you and into your mind. The countries that don't realize this will be on the losing end. The countries that embrace it, the countries that allow creativity and intuition be there to create the new values, those are the countries that are going to be on the winning side. And I agree with you, Professor. It's not about whose culture. It's culture, period. All countries, all nationalities can make a contribution. I know this because I grew up in a multi cultural family, and I love the way you describe, what we stand for. And now that I speak, now I understand. I speak for my Catholic mother. I speak for my Jewish father. I speak for the Roma friends that I have with whom I play music. So this was wonderful. So it was great listening to that. But moreover, more importantly, my children, I just became a grandfather. I'm very, very proud to have little Olivia. Little Olivia is really it's just amazing. My wife is Serbian and Croatian. So she brought into the family already the Orthodox culture and the Croatian Catholic culture, which is a little different from the Hungarian Catholic culture. So when we got married, I found two really Hungarian children. How much more Hungarian can you get when you are 1/4 Serb, 1/4 Croat, 1/4 Jewish, 1/4 Hungarian? That's really what makes them a real Hungarian. Now, to add insult to injury, if you want, my little granddaughter is even more complicated because my son is married to a Flemish girl. Any Belgians around? No. Any Flemish around? Okay. I shouldn't have said that because that's insulting. But I just wanted to say that's the real. So what I wanted to say, I'm really, really in favor of not clashing of, but civilizations finding each other. Now, I want to tell you first of all, when I was a little boy, my father took me to the movies, and we went to see The Three Musketeers. And it's D'Artagnan, we all children want to see. And it was amazing because for me, the most memorable part of that evening was not D'Artagnan, but before the feature film, there was a newsreel. And the newsreel was about, this was in the late 50s, early 60s. And the newsreel was about this sickness that is catching on American youth, which is called rock and roll. And, the kids were dancing and shaking and twisting, and the commentator said, look, that's the sickness, and these children or these kids will be totally crazy. And there was a great band. There was a guy who was wearing a Tony Curtis haircut. You know Tony Curtis, what nationality Tony Curtis is? Of course, Hungarian. And this guy was singing, and there was a stand-up bass, and there was a guitar and a drum. The guy's name was Elvis Presley. And I was sitting there, and I was even smaller than I am now. And I was sitting there, and my legs dangling and hanging. And I said, that is That is the music I like. And why is it important? Because in those days, all this was basically banned in my country. Don't forget, we're talking about the 50s and the 60s. We're in the middle of the Cold War. Hungary, Poland, Czechoslovakia, East Germany, Romania, Russia. We were all cut off from the West. A barbed wire, a wall, an iron curtain separated us. And, you know, it's quite amazing how this music. Yesterday, Mark asked me, well, what's so exciting about rock and roll music that made a difference? You know, why is it so attractive? Well, it's very, very difficult to say, but it's powerful. It sends an incredible energy. It's easy to understand. Not that culture should be simple, but it has to be accessible for people. High culture is great. But you know what? Good, high-quality popular culture is also very important. And that's exactly what rock and roll was. By the way, those who say it's easy, you know, I have this story. I have this great story. There's this famous band called Crosby, Stills and Nash and Young, and they're playing a concert, and one of the Kennedy children are in the crowd, and well, it's not exactly dance music. It's wonderful music. It's not dance music. So this, I think it was Caroline Kennedy, she got tired of this and walks up to Stephen Stills and says, quietly whispering into his ears, in the middle of a song, Mr. Stills, could you play something else because some of us would like to dance? Steve Stills stops the music. Hey, stop, you know, stops the music in its shoes and takes off his guitar and says, lady, why don't you play? So I'm just telling you, don't think it's easy, because good rock and roll music is as difficult to play as any music, if it's good. But what I want to say, it's the power, it's the freedom it projects. When I first saw or heard great rock and roll music, and it basically was, honestly, it was the Beatles who caught my attention. I had no idea about politics. I was 11 or 12 years old. It had nothing to do with politics. And intuitively, deep inside me, it sent a message that I could not comprehend, that I could not understand, but which transcended beyond the very concrete understanding of what this is about. This was about freedom. So no wonder it caught the attention of young people, not only in the West, but also in the East. Please understand, those people, those young people, the young generation, the 60s generation, in the West, when they embraced rock and roll music, they wanted a better democracy. Period. When we embraced it in the East, we wanted democracy. Period. So for us, it was amazing. It was the same, but it was a little different. It was different because we could not immediately have access to it. We had to fight for it. We had to work hard to enjoy the same music as our peers in the West. Now, here's something I owe my gratitude to Luxembourg, because there was a radio station in Europe which was absolutely the best of them all. It was called Radio Luxembourg, and I hope there are books written about it. I don't know. Are there books written about it? Good. I haven't read them because I don't need to, because I know what's in the book. Anyway, you know, it was a pirate radio station put into Luxembourg because even the Brits, even the Dutch, even the French, they did not want a radio station like that. So it was stationed in Luxembourg. and poured out the best possible rock and roll music you can imagine. Very immediate, great comments, great DJs. And of course, in the middle of the night, we would always, every night, every single day of the week, we would tune into rock and roll music on Radio Luxembourg. Let me tell you a little story or maybe to illustrate how important this was, because I want to get to the diplomatic part very quickly. You know, my father had bought us a very good transistor radio, which was better than the ones you could get from the Soviet Union, if you could say. And shortwave was not blocked out on it, because most of the foreign radio stations, Voice of America, Radio Free Europe, was on shortwave. So that had to be blocked out. So for years and years, the radios you could buy in Hungary did not have shortwave. This one had a shortwave. And every weekend, my brother and the whole class of my brother, went into the mountains of Budapest, where there was better reception, and we were away from the eyes of the police or the neighbors. And you know, the amazing thing is, you had 38 children, 38 kids out in the mountains in Budapest, listening to music, and never any of them had given away their secret. So important was the opportunity to listen to this. And another little story. I spent some time with my aunt, basically 2 years. And my aunt and my uncle were hardline communists, really hardline, very disciplined and very. And we would listen to the radio at night. And on one occasion, when we were listening to this radio, my uncle runs into bursts into a room, snatches the radio, takes it away, and next day I said, "Sorry, Uncle, we apologize for the music. It was not the music. You were listening to Western radio stations." So just to we never got back the radio. I just to put you in our mindset. But that could not stop anything. You know, the authorities were so worried about rock and roll music. They really tried to block it. And then when they couldn't block it, they tamed it. You know, they created some official Hungarian bands. And I mean, okay, forget about that. The bottom line is, this music was the first phenomenon which really, really cut through the Iron Curtain, through the airwaves, in an amazing way, and reaching millions and millions of young people. Now, I want to jump ahead in time. I want to tell you that I do believe that, of course, it was the perseverance of some leaders. No, it was leadership in Western Europe, which, of course, for me includes America in this context, that actually brought down the Iron Curtain. It was the leadership of Ronald Reagan and later Bush Sr. It was the leadership of Margaret Thatcher, Helmut Kohl, Bettino Craxi, that really paved the way to opening up the borders, bringing down the Iron Curtain. And by the way, for me as a Hungarian, it's still awesome to stand here in Berlin. And I was this morning walking from the former western side, took a big walk to the Alexanderplatz, and I can still not believe that I can do this freely. So please understand that, of course, politics was what actually made it happen. But it would not have happened had popular music, popular Western culture, the popular Western culture of freedom had not infiltrated Central and Eastern Europe. It paved the way. It opened our minds to the West. Because, you know, it's not just rock and roll. It is about freedom, freedom of expression, the freedom to do what you feel is right in your society. So, when I became an ambassador, what has this to do with diplomacy? Well, first, diplomacy is something that has changed over the centuries, but I'm telling you, it has changed more in the last 25 years than it has changed in the previous 2,000-3,000 years. Diplomacy actually is changing as we speak, and no one can deny that after the WikiLeaks, I call it a problem. Others are pleased with it, yet others call it a disaster. I would just say that it's a phenomenon, but diplomacy cannot be done the way it was done for not only thousands of years ago, but like it was done 10, 15 years ago. So therefore, it is also important that, as an ambassador, especially if you're an ambassador of a small country, you want to figure out how to put your country on the map. It's very difficult. And especially when you're in the United States, it's extremely difficult. Don't forget, Washington is the place where you have 200 embassies, 200 ambassadors, and they all want to talk to the same people, and it's only 20 people. They all want to see the president. They all want to see the Secretary of State. They all want to talk to the 5 important senators. They all want to talk to the chief justices. Okay, so the bottom line is it's a fierce competition, and it's very, very difficult to find your way through this maze. But this comes. So therefore, you have to be inventive. You have to have the ability to think outside the box. You have to figure out new things to do. But be very careful. Only adults should tamper with things like that. Only if you have the experience. It's like when you have all these funny things on television, which comes with a little sign, don't attempt to do it at home unless you're a professional. Because, don't forget, diplomacy is diplomacy. It's about access, it's about positions, it's about statements, it's about interests, it's about conflicting interests, it's about finding common platforms. So there will always be a professional side to it. But then, thinking outside the box, I figured I have to do something which will make a difference. And frankly, that ambassadors invite quartets to play at the embassy, and that's traditional. I mean, I'm sorry to say, I invited fantastic classical musicians, but really that didn't make a difference. So what I did, I embraced the arts in a different way. I invited the most stunning contemporary Hungarian artists to decorate the Hungarian embassy. Americans went crazy about this. And then I put together a rock band. Okay. And I made this rock band very special because I invited not other Hungarians and not other diplomats, but I invited people who were actually just like me, people who wanted to be musicians before they ever became anything else. So I invited the American ambassador to Moscow, Sandy Versbaugh, to be my drummer. I invited the Assistant Secretary of State of the United States, Lincoln Bluefield, to be my bass player. I invited a friend of mine who is, as we speak, the Deputy Secretary of Energy in the Obama administration, to be our other guitarist. And then to make sure that it's a professional band, I invited Skunk Baxter from the Doobie Brothers to, the Doobie Brothers? And you know Steely Dan as well? Who knows Steely Dan? Remember My Old School? You remember My Old? Ricky, don't lose that number? Okay. Well, Skunk Baxter from our band played that. So, it was a pretty good band. But it was still risky. It was still risky because, you can easily make a fool out of yourself. So you'd better be good. So I'm telling you, we rehearsed a lot, but always after midnight. Because during the day I had to go to the State Department, I had to go to the White House, I had to go to Congress, I had to see this, that. But it did make an impact. And you know why? Because it projected a better understanding of American culture. It projected the idea that this Hungarian ambassador, who comes from a country, nobody has ever heard of, and he is speaking our language. Don't forget, it's the rock and roll generation in charge in America today and in Europe today. So when I picked up the guitar, I had, beyond English, or whatever is spoken in the United States, Mark, I had a special language which had a shortcut to the minds and hearts and minds of the Americans. And that's really the point. I don't want to run out of time. I just want to say I was encouraged by the success of the rock band. We never got a contract, but but we did do things that others don't do. And you know what? Whatever we did made it into the mainstream media. And that's the point. You want to have an impact. You want Americans to understand what's the narrative, what's the message of the Hungarians. And the message of the Hungarians is that Hungarians and Americans and other Europeans are in it together. And that was really the underlying message. That's why they liked it so much. So it became a diplomatic tool. When I went to play, you remember Hurricane Katrina? It was a disaster. It was really a terrible thing. We went to play a concert in support of the musicians in New Orleans who had lost all their belongings, who had lost their instruments. We raised $150,000. That's a lot of money. That's a lot of money to raise just for one concert, especially compared to the amount I get now for one gig. So, but anyway, and then we went to play at Walter Reed Army Hospital, which is the hospital where they treat all the veterans from Iraq and Afghanistan. And then we played for an organization called the Pulmonary Hypertension Association. And then we played for schools which were trying to find support for black children, African American children, to be supported, and on and on and on. We did a lot of interesting concerts, but all of it was part of my diplomatic effort. Don't ever misunderstand it. It was not just fun. For fun, I went out occasionally and played in places like Madam's Organ in Washington, D.C. You should see the logo. It really is fascinating. Check it out on the internet. Madam's Organ, Washington, D.C. But the bottom line is, I want to come to something. I'm very cautious not to suggest. First of all, I'm not suggesting all ambassadors should start playing the guitar, because what works for me might not work for the others. What I'm suggesting is rock and roll in this respect is only a metaphor. It's a metaphor. Each ambassador and diplomats have to find ways that will make diplomatic life interesting. They also have to slowly understand that public diplomacy and traditional old-fashioned diplomacy walk hand in hand. Where did we make the biggest mistake, biggest blunder in North Africa and the Middle East recently? Is that we did not wield our soft power when it was called for, and therefore our societies were missing in action when all this thing happened. And how interesting. And really, I want to come to the essence of it. How interesting. I want to make sure that while I say that rock and roll only is a metaphor, that you understand that you will have to invent your own rock and roll for your own generation. And if you want, for me, Google and Facebook and whatever is coming is the new rock and roll. So what rock and roll, okay, let's put it this way. Rock and roll was for me what the internet was for generations 20 years later, and what Facebook is for the generations after that. So that you understand that when I say rock and roll, I don't actually mean just the music, just the rock and roll music that of course I love and embrace, but it's a mindset. It's a mindset to be able to understand that you involve and include things that are not traditionally in diplomatic life. You know, it's, of course, my understanding of popular culture led me to efforts to find other means as well. And that's how I came to the Colbert Report. Have you heard of Stephen Colbert? Are there anyone from the U.S. Here? Wow, that's great. Do you watch the Colbert Report? Anyone? It's the only news we watch. I have. My band's called the Coalition of the Willing. And you know, the Coalition of the Willing was not exactly popular among young people in the United States, because that's the name of the troops that went into Iraq. But we called ourselves the Coalition of the Willing, especially because half of the group did not agree with the war. The other half did. So we had a great clash, you know. Bass agreed, lead guitar not so much. But the bottom line is, I wanted to figure out, you know, what is it that Americans, you know, what is it that influences Americans? And I say this because I went to see Jon Stewart, and I brought him a Coalition of the Willing T-shirt, and I have a picture with him smiling and holding my Coalition of the Willing T-shirt, and he did not like the actual Coalition of the Willing. But the bottom line is, the Colbert Report is really a spin-off from the Jon Stewart show. And you have to understand that this is a new phenomenon in America, because it's a new generation late-night show which talks about, well, first of all, the late-night shows are exciting because you have to look at it from the American angle, not from the European angle. When people watch it and watch the same things in Europe, they laugh, but they don't really understand. It's really something, part of the essential American culture. It grew out of the Jay Leno, Conan O'Brien type of stuff. Very, very influential, by the way. So I wanted to understand what is driving all these TV shows. Why are they so popular? Why is it that 10 million Americans tune in to Jay Leno, and 3 million or 4 million to Jon Stewart and Conan and Stephen Colbert? Because it's a mirror to America. So if this is a mirror to America, I want Americans to see Hungary in that mirror. That was really what drove me to the Colbert Report. By the way, I went to see and talk to Jay Leno. I went to see and talk to Ellen DeGeneres. I went to see, Bill Maher, who's Hungarian, half Hungarian. Americans do know who Bill is, huh? Okay, he's a little tough, but and I went to see a couple of others, and then I arrived to to Stephen Colbert. And it's a relatively simple situation, but that's what diplomats are about. Colbert decided that he will enter a competition to have a Hungarian bridge named after him. And the guy is amazing. By the way, as a private person, he's pretty conservative. He's a very conservative Catholic, by the way. And you wouldn't tell after watching his shows. Because the persona he represents is a conservative, quote-unquote, American, but basically pushing for very liberal views. And And the funny thing was that he entered the competition, he got 50 million votes, and there are only 10 million Hungarians. So that was funny. And so I called him. I called him, I said, well, what is this, Mr. Colbert? And he said, Mr. Ambassador, what am I going to wear for the inauguration? So some of you have seen it, some of you have not. I don't want to. But we made a nice piece out of it. My staff worked for 3 weeks to prepare the narrative and, the idea, and happily, Colbert bought the idea we presented to him. And honestly, it was a breakthrough in my communication with America. But it was also, if you want, a breakthrough in the way many diplomats started to see the way they have to communicate with the Americans. Many did not get it, but I did get a phone call from some of the other ambassadors next morning asking me how I did it and how you get on the show. And I said, you don't, because you don't have the mindset. Because unless you embrace this, unless it comes from the inside of you, it's going to be very difficult. But please understand, the Colbert Report is just another rock and roll. It's a virtual rock and roll. It has given me an amazing, amazing backing in terms of presenting my country, because in the end, it's not about having fun. In the end, you want to find a platform to present your country. And people were clearly more receptive to hear about Hungary from a person who understands Americans. And I just hope, I hope it's true. I think Americans have seriously started to understand more than ever before that unless they embrace other cultures, their own culture will be not understood the way they hope it is understood. Finally, I'd like to say a few words about the way I look at power, because soft power is something that I have been working with. Now they call it smart power. And then I have noticed Hillary Clinton has started calling it people's power or people power. Really doesn't matter. Forget about the tags. What matters is that we understand that hard power and soft power together has to be our toolbox for this generation. You cannot look at soft power and hard power in separation. Interestingly enough, Professor, you started talking about colors. Well, I and a couple of friends have started talking about power in colors. We started talking about spectral power. So we do not separate soft power and hard power. What we say is that nuclear weapons is hard power and it's on the red end of the scale. And then as you move to the other end, soft power is on the blue or even purple end of the scale. And in between, there are different colors. And trust me, you can attach different tools of power to the different colors. For example, peace support operations with heavy military backing probably is green, right there somewhere in the middle. Or you take the AIDS campaign of the United States, which, by the way, is an amazing tool and probably one of the best soft power tools the Americans have ever invented in Africa. It's probably there around the orange part because it really has an incredible impact. Or take, for example, the enlargement of the European Union. It's a power tool, except our politicians mostly don't think about this or think of it as a power tool. It's an incentive. It's influence. It's the influence of our cultures, our ideas, our values. And it's I would place it there right in the middle, because I would call that hard soft power. So what I'm trying to say is that try to look at power in a spectral way. Not just hard power, not just soft power, but in a spectrum, because we are never going to be in the position to give as much resources to our hard power toolbox as we used to have. Our societies have lost the appetite for that. Our democracies have lost appetite for that. Unfortunately, leadership has lost appetite for that, even when it's called for. Now, I'm not advocating that you can replace hard power when it's called for with soft power. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is use soft power whenever soft power has a bigger and better impact. Like, for example, in the Middle East. Had we understood the whole soft power toolbox and this whole idea that soft power can be hard if used properly, it's not necessarily soft all the time, we would have been better prepared and we would have had a much greater influence in the events in the Middle East, Egypt, Tunisia, and whatever is to come. You know, I want to warn you, I am not a peacenik, as they call them. I'm someone who's for peace, and I know, with my background in NATO, having fought wars, having established peace, I know what hard power really is about. But I do know what soft power is about. And in conclusion, I just want to tell you, this whole debate today, the professor's speech, the activities of the Institute, Mark's mindset is about soft power. And why I joined forces with Mark is because I believe that soft power in the 21st century is going to be the new hard power. So, in conclusion, let me tell you this. A few years ago, and I just wonder what I left out of the speech, and probably nothing, and I've spoken for too long, but I just want to say, a few years ago, Ahmadinejad banned, I'm not going to learn that. I don't have to because hopefully he's out anyway. I did a piece, he banned rock and roll music from Iran. And I wrote a piece in the Financial Times with the title, "The Stratocaster is more powerful than the Kalashnikov." And my message was very simple. What rock and roll did to me when I was growing up behind the Iron Curtain prompts me to think that there's nothing that can stop freedom from any country. And I concluded the article saying that I will live to see Paul McCartney play on Main Square in Tehran. I want to conclude with that because I believe rock and roll has a future, and we will all go to Tehran to celebrate. Thank you so much.